Good evening, Dr. Wei, and I am Sangeeta Kumrison, and this is my thesis title, The Impact of Discrimination Towards Happiness and Acceptance Level Among LGBT Students in Malaysia. Throughout this presentation, we will be addressing discrimination with the initial D, happiness with the initial of H, and acceptance with the initial of A. The purpose of my study, or the problem statement of my study, is to 1. Discover and expose the trend of D and A ended by the LGBT students. Because in Malaysia, homophobia or any related issues towards LGBT is a taboo, not to be spread, not to be spoken about, and despite researches were made to help to actually blow out the misconception, Malaysians continue to be non-existent and ignore the data. The second one is to uncover the current psychological torture ended by the students. Although there's a saying that goes by, although you are being ignorant, you are minding your own business, it's good to not form any harm or any benevolent towards other people. But in Malaysia, no, we ignore, we act as if these people are aliens, but at the same time we give them psychological and sometimes physical torture towards them. All the misconception, the rules, the words, the slangs, the catfishing is what we are doing to these people. Either we should let them to live in peace, or we should include them as part of us. Selangor topped the country's history by winning over a jurisdiction case to reduce the heavy penalties. But what do? They win legislatively, but we still continue to give them the societal pressure. This is what I would like to find out in my study. In this study, I have formulated 4 research objectives, 4 research questions, and 6 hypotheses. So for my research objectives and questions, I would like to firstly study the relationship between D towards H and A. Secondly, the impact between D towards H and A. The third and the fourth, which is almost similar, where I would like to measure the difference between the ethnicity and the states towards discrimination. I would like to see which ethnic is way being racist, being homophobic towards these people, and which state that is actually performing and actually providing the insecure land for these people to live in peace. The outcome of 4 research objectives and questions is hypothesis, 6 hypotheses. All of them are alternative, thus showing that there is a positive significance, relationship, impact, or difference between all the variables I had stated previously. The significance or the benefits of the study. I have divided this into 3 groups, namely knowledge, field, and practical. For the knowledge, mainly my aim of the study is to bring knowledge, to bring vigilance towards the public, where despite ignoring so much, at least my study would bring awareness towards university students, where I have seen the existence of LGBTQ community in my university, but they face the homophobic flare faced was too much, which guided me to do this study. The next one is field. In the terms of field, I refer to educational psychology, where being a teacher, being a tuition teacher, and a part of the society itself. I really hope this study, the data, the outcomes would actually serve beneficial towards the future generation, namely students. They are innocent and they actually absorb what people around them behave and speak. So I really hope that this study, or any student who passes this, would actually get a breakthrough of what is true and what is false, and actually be inclusive or actively inclusive towards these participants, who might be their friends, who might be their siblings, who might be sometimes even their parents. The third one is practical. For the practical, I refer towards higher authorities. It could be government, it could be the HR department of a company, where despite being so seemingly strict, I really hope they can come up with alternatives to actually help this community to be as normal as they can in the terms of employment, benefits, human rights. Give them anything that can make sure that they live peacefully as other Malaysians does. The limitations I faced pre or throughout this research is basically lack of time, the sensitivity and the possible issues on reliability and validity, because I had no time to conduct a pilot test, and solely I was so afraid that it would affect. Limitations will be discussed more detailedly in chapter 5. As for chapter 2, my literature review, I have picked two theories that resembles towards my study. The first one would be social identity theory by Henry Touchfeld, which I have picked to actually represent the element of discrimination. In Henry Touchfeld's theory, he had categorized social or society into three groups, namely categorization, identification, and comparison. The first thing proposed by Henry Touchfeld is categorization. According to the researcher, categorization happens through our observation, especially when we assume that we belong to some other groups. For example, the IT group, the university group, the marketing department, and things such as that. How do we categorize ourselves? Usually by our observation. By looking at somebody, we would usually place our similarities, try to connect with these people to see that we belong in this group. We belong in this group. How do we determine that we belong into this group? Usually based by how we were raised and where we were raised. So, for example, using the categorization, these LGBTQ people identify themselves as an LGBT, which is a growing community or a growing categorization compared to other people who identify themselves as a heterosexual group, which refers back to the in-group and out-group theory. Out-group theory. In this case, when these people observe having similar people around them, they feel more safe, and they group themselves based on how they were raised, their inner principles, their philosophies, their beliefs, their misbeliefs. This is more towards an emotional contact or social belonging or self-belonging concept. In the terms of identification, which is the second stage proposed by Henry Touchfeld, which literally means how do you identify yourself? How do you think? Who do you think yourself you are? And although this isn't politically correct or not rigidly correct, but actually identification literally shows you how fluid somebody or something could be. For instance, I identify myself as a woman. I identify myself as an Indian, a Hindu, at the same time as the eldest child of my family, at the same time as a master's holder, and so on. I could be here the whole day. Same goes to these LGBTQ people. They identify as themselves either as a lesbian, gay, transgender, or bisexual, or so on. We have the queer, we have the non-binary, we have the gender fluid community, and they identify themselves. So when they observe and they identify themselves, when we categorize and then when we identify ourselves, we develop a sense of belonging, we develop a sense of validation. What happens next? The next one would be comparison. The meaning of comparison is the us versus them nature. At the same time, we would think like, who's superior? Am I better? I have the more members, so my group is better, my group is stronger, my group is powerful. So these perceptions build at the third stage of the theory, which is comparison. It's a common human tendency to appear better, but still Usually we focus on the plus points on the positive side. Some of us even force ourselves to be included into some group, but often we forget the forgotten or ignored community or the minority. Some situations that I can explore or some situations that I can explain would be ethnocentrism, superiority, inferiority, seniority, that sometimes abandons and neglects the other nature, the other parties. So this is what social identity theory explains about. The second theory that I chose would be positive psychology theories by Seligman, or specifically the three dimensions of happiness, namely the past, present, and future. So, firstly, Seligman actually said that in order to chase happiness or to gain happiness, the first way would be to deal with the past by giving gratitude and forgiving of everything that happened. Everything that happened, as concerns, problems, and challenges are something common. A human needs to be more mature and to seek for more happiness. And then the second manner that he proposed to deal with the present is to actually break habits, appreciate events, and practice mindfulness. This is shown where exhibiting more positive emotions or forcing yourself to feel more happy instead of feeling empty would actually bring you or actually help you to see life in a different perspective, which goes to the third part where Seligman suggests that the future can be built and filled with happiness when we actually share the happiness towards people. When people say that laughter is contagious, it's true. Positive emotions, there is a research that claimed that positive emotions, which is driven by the hormone dopamine, is actually contagious. It's actually contagious. So these are my theories for chapter 2. And next would be the theoretical framework, which explains all the relationships I have stated previously, which goes to the chapter 3. Now we will be talking about chapter 3, the methodology. As for the research design, I chose a quantitative research design due to my time limit as well as the current situation I'm going through. As due to COVID, we were not allowed to move around a lot. At the same time, I'm an adult learner, which is a working adult. At the same time, I felt that actually passing these surveys, passing this Google form would actually at the same time save time for me, at the same time get I can get responses as quick as I can. I was given 2 weeks and I literally managed to catch the momentum. I wonder if I use the qualitative method, would I be able to complete until now? At the same time, it helps me to eliminate bias, because I would not be keen towards one answer and the answers are solely based on the participants' perception towards the item. At the same time, I chose descriptive research design. It would be very simple for me to actually disseminate online questions compared to actually interview them. And I also chose a cross-sectional surveys because I would like to measure my variables of each participants at a specific time. As for the samples, I have 379 samples according to the Craigie and Morgan table. So my variables, the first one would be gender identity. I have taken this demographic questionnaire, I have replicated this demographic questionnaire from a local study. So going back to the topic, my gender identity, female cisgender scored the most. Female cisgender might be a queer person, might be a bisexual person, or might be even a lesbian person. As for the sexual orientation, again, lesbian topped the highest frequency. For the age, My participants are highly aged between 25 to 29 years old, where the frequency is 136 respondents compared to other categories. For my ethnicity variable, the Chinese community topped the bar with 141 respondents, followed by 132 Indian respondents. As for the religion, the shocking fact is Hindu topped the highest frequency with 131 respondents. And for the educational qualification, my respondents range across diploma students, which might be a fresh grad after SPM, or even those that have been denied their rights to study, as not all universities in Malaysia accepts someone who physically looks different compared to their IC. For the employment status, my respondents, most of them are not employed, probably because they might be a student. And for the states, the most important and interesting variable is the Peninsula topped with 309 respondents with 81.5%, keeping up to almost 80% of the respondents. So this is my conceptual framework. Showing the relationship between my independent variable towards the dependent variable. My instruments, I have chosen two instruments to be included in my study. The first one is the demographic questionnaire. As I've said previously, I have replicated it from a local study, a recent study in 2021, where I have replicated the gender identity, sexual orientation, age, ethnicity, originated states, religion, and current education and employment status. Since it was a local based, I didn't take a lot to change the questionnaire. The second questionnaire I chose is to measure discrimination and acceptance. To measure discrimination and acceptance. It consists of two parts, where out of 59 items in total, it is differentiated into two parts, where part A has 39 items which measures 6 subscales: discrimination, rejection, victimization, non-affirmation, internalization, transphobia, and pride. They were measured across a standardized cutoff between never, yes, yes, and yes in the past year. At the same time, the scores were based on a Likert scale, a 4-point Likert scale, where 0 stands for strongly disagree and 4 stands for strongly agree. For the part B measures two different subscales, which is negative expectation for future events and community connectedness. These two measures equals to the acceptance variable in my study, with a 4-pointed scales from 0 to 4, strongly disagree to strongly agree. To measure happiness, I have chosen the satisfaction with life scale from the year 2013, and there are only 5 items in this questionnaire with a 7-pointed Likert scale, where 7 stands for strongly agree and 1 stands for disagree. Okay, I have also conducted the psychometric properties of the instruments. The first one would be reliability or Cronbach alpha, where as for the Cronbach alpha value, both the GMSR and the satisfaction with life scales consistently scored a 0.731 and 0.810, showing that both instruments have a high level of internal consistency with the scales. As for the validity of GMSR is all the 59 items of the GMSR scores greater than 0.3, which shows high validity. But at the same time, it also showed that removing GMSR item number 6, 15 and 22 would lead to an increased alpha value or increased reliability, where it would be greater than 7.31 up to 0.821. As for the happiness measuring scale, which is the SWLS, the item total correlation for all five items is greater than 3, thus showing high validity. However, it also indicated that removing the second item would lead to an increased alpha value up to 8.12, while removing the first item would lead to a decreased value by 0.01. As for the normality, I've also measured the normality for discrimination, acceptance, and happiness. In this case, the skewness for discrimination showed a positive value of 0.137, thus having a long right tail. As for the courtesies, the courtesies value for discrimination, it has a positive value of 0.924, where the K value is actually smaller than 2. Since it is smaller than 2, the leptokurtic or thin distribution will exist, and the graph would be more peaked than a normal distribution with longer tails. As for acceptance, the skewness shows a negative value of negative 0.229, thus indicating a long left tail. At the same time, the courtesies value is also a negative value, which is negative 0.176, where the K value is smaller than 2. Therefore, a platykurtic or flatter distribution would happen, where the graph would be flatter than a normal distribution with shorter tails. As for the happiness, the skewness is a positive value of 0.205, showing a long right tail. At the same time, the courtesies value is a negative 0.395, where the K value is smaller than 2. Thus, again, a platykurtic distribution would occur, where the graph would be flatter than a normal distribution with shorter tails. This is my procedure or my outline of my study. Okay, the data analysis, the final part for my chapter 3. For the inferential analysis specifically, I have chosen 3 analyses. The Pearson correlation to specifically measure the relationship, the regression analysis to specifically measure the impact of the variables, and the third one I have chosen one-way ANOVA to actually to measure the difference between ethnicity and the states towards discrimination. As for chapter 4, the results, the first objective, which is the relationship between D with happiness H and acceptance A, the result states that discrimination and happiness is highly correlated. Thus, we assume that if discrimination scores increase, then the happiness scores would also decrease. But at the same time, the significant value reports to be 0.038, and since the p-value is lesser than 0.05, the hypothesis is accepted, thus showing there is a significant relationship between discrimination and happiness scores. Next, the results also state that discrimination and acceptance are highly correlated. Therefore, if the discrimination increases, then the acceptance score would decrease. Since the p-value is lesser than 0.05, the hypothesis is accepted, thus showing there is a significant relationship between discrimination and happiness scores. As for the significant impact, which is the second objective, the results indicate that there is a collective significant effect between D and happiness, therefore signifying an impact on discrimination towards happiness. In this case, we accept the hypothesis, at the same time showing that each increasing point for discrimination there is a decreased rate in happiness of 0.035. Therefore, in conclusion, there is a significant impact of discrimination towards happiness. Secondly, the results also state that there is a collective significant effect between discrimination and acceptance, where showing that there's a significant impact, therefore accepting the stated hypothesis with a keynote stating that for each increasing point for discrimination, there is a decreased rate in acceptance for 0.077. As for the difference levels between ethnicity and states towards discrimination, especially for the ethnicity, since the significant value shown is 0.016, which meant that the population means are exactly equal, it allows the researcher a chance of 1.6% to find the difference observed in the sample, thus showing there is a significant effect of ethnicity towards discrimination. As for the originated states, the significant value shown is 0.048. Thus, if the population are exactly equal, the researcher would have the chance of 4.8% to find the differences. Therefore, again showing that there is a significance between the states and discrimination. As for my chapter 5, which is discussion, I have 4 objectives as I have mentioned before this. For my first objective, which shows a significant relationship between the variables, I have justified my discussion by stating the controversial statements given by our Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, Datuk Sri Mahathir Mohamad, whom lashed and posed threats on LGBTQ rights to live freely. For instance, homophobic statements were made at a National Counselling Conference in 2012, claiming that symptoms of LGBT disease has been ended by the Western countries are currently invading Malaysia. So, counsellors are required to actually prevent the spread of such disease, when actually WHO has actually officially removed homophobia as a disease based away from DSM-4 in 2013. Besides that, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin has also encouraged the PDRM, the religious branch of Malaysia, to actually take actions by allowing them to raid their personal premises, at the same time allowing them to control their action over social media, at the same time stage a lot of dramas, a lot of events regarding prohibiting LGBTQ and portraying LGBT as a sort of disorder. At the same time, Datuk Sri Mahathir made a huge statement via online stating that we need people to reproduce, and we condone LGBTQ behaviors because they don't reproduce the next generation. As for the second objective investigating the impact between discrimination can be strongly justified via Cornell's Center of Study Equality, stating that discrimination and suicidal ideation is correlated, where people, especially the LGBTQ, endure symptoms such as suicidal ideation, anxiety, panic attacks, substance abuse, and heart-related diseases as well as PTSD. On the other hand, they also claim that discrimination, prejudice, and social stigma, which is mirroring effect, actually produces low self-esteem, expectation of rejection, fear of discrimination, and stigma. On the other hand, this can be justified via the harsh using of conversion therapy especially among LGBT adolescents, which is popular throughout the Western countries, but in Malaysia, we use religion. Besides that, Followed by that, the third objective, which is the differences between ethnicity. Being an Islam-majored country where 80% of our Malaysian citizens are from the Muslim religion, we are well known to condone LGBTQ human rights, where 13 states nodded approval for introducing Sharia laws to ban transvestism. At the same time, Human Rights Watch by 2020 has also claimed some awful statements where Human Rights Watch 2020 had stated a few statements in their article where where society had been abusing the LGBTQ community by placing their dignity and freedom as the religious department had allowed them to do anything they like, such as locking them in males lockup, forcing them to dress as their gender, at the same time accuse and physically abuse them, considering them promoting prostitution. Finally, for objective 4, differences between originated states to Malaysia. Malaysia has been topping the list for not allowing LGBTQ, especially via their actions where having a sexuality rights festival in Kuala Lumpur since 2018, where Sexuality Merdeka was a popular play promoted by the Religious Department of Malaysia in portraying the so-called negative lifestyle of LGBTQ people. In the musical, LGBTQ individuals were struck by lightning and turned straight or heterosexual, which is some of the most shocking scripted in the play. On the other hand, Kuala Besut also came into the headlines in 2011 by running a re-education boot camp where 60 boys who were believed to behave in a feminine manner were sent to the camp for rehabilitation purposes. Besides that, I have also supported my objective via incidents such as removing LGBT activist Pang Ki-Teck and Nisha Ayub's portrait. At the same time, brutally beating Nisha Ayub, a transgender activist. At the same time, the murder of transgender women, especially Samira Krishnan in Kuantan. Followed by that, the next slide would be the limitation I ended throughout the research and post-research. The first limitation that I ended was difficulty in obtaining respondents, especially since my respondents were deemed as a minority in Malaysia and a hidden community in Malaysia. I had the difficulty in finding them, especially convincing them that this research for their own good. At the same time, since I used snowballing effect, it ended up to a situation where my respondents were extremely low in the first week of data collection period, but I had a lot of views on my social media posts. My second difficulty would be to educate and bring awareness to the public. This I refer to societal behavioral issues such as condoning, boycotting, at the same time discouraging, criticizing, and misinterpreting my problem statement and my purpose to bring this study forward. And the last one would be sampling methodology. My sampling methodology was solely based on purposive sampling, which is followed by cluster sampling as a backup contingency. In this case, I would say that I had a tough time in this sampling methodology as I had to endure a lot of different issues, including behavioral issues, including legislative issues, where I had to enter a policy check upon submitting my survey to the northern countries such as Kelantan and Kedah, where they request a verified stamp on my survey by their religious department, by their state religious department. Followed by that, the suggestions that I would give for my future researchers would be using a different mode for data collection. Yes, quantitative was easy, and it actually helped me to gain data in a more incognito mode. But personally, I feel like using qualitative would be better to approach these kind of issues. And at the same time, sometimes I would suggest the future researchers to include a traditional data collection method, such as physically being present to pass the survey forms instead of being dependent on the internet. At the same time, would actually build a conversation, build some sort of rapport before actually passing the surveys. Passing the surveys would be a mode to convince the respondents that they are secure. Their data is secure, privacy is secure. The second one would be narrowing down the choice of participants. In my case, I have stated LGBT students. Maybe the future researchers can narrow down to maybe lesbian students. One, it is easier for me to spread my web to catch participants. Number two, it would be easier for me to interpret the situation. And the third, it would be easier for me to actually target my participants, as if I choose those who are really affected by the variables, I would get a better result compared to those who are in the M40 and T20 category. They would not feel what they have gone through. As in real life experience, when I approached some of the LGBTQ personalities and expressed my request to fill up the survey, they actually said they no longer need all this, as they have already achieved what they want. Finally, the implications. As I have said before, the biggest implication I could achieve is spreading awareness to the public, especially students, especially the younger generation, because again, the younger generation actually imitate what we say, what we believe, and how we act. So that is my first thing. Especially being in the field of educational psychology, my study would be an initial step, would be an early step to actually correct their mindsets, correct their schema, and replace the interpretation with actual humanitarian knowledge. At the same time, the implication of my study, since if my study was passed and utilized between the field of organizational psychology, people in organization, especially the HR department, would actually gain benefit, as actually they will start identifying their colleagues who are from the LGBTQ. And even though they know that the specific person was from LGBTQ, they would actually cook up more initiatives, such as public restrooms, such as working hours, or anything that can make them to feel better and belonged in the workplace. And finally, I hope that with the findings of my study, the government or any other department would take this as a part of their meta-analysis and actually come to the realization that there is a part of the community in Malaysia that is not living peacefully. So these are my intentions. Overall, I would say that my study was a successful attempt. Although this is just the beginning, I hope that I could further develop my study in a much more better way. And thank you so much.